thanks everyone for coming here. Thanks for joining. I have someone who is very well known here with me, Robert Spencer. Robert, nice to meet you. Why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, hello. I am the director of Jihad Watch, which is at jihadwatch.org, and the author of 18 books on various aspects of Islam and jihad, including the history of jihad, which is the first and only one-volume narrative history of the entirety of the jihad phenomenon from Muhammad to today, and other books such as The Complete Infidel's Guide to the Quran, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades, The Truth About Muhammad, The Complete Infidel's Guide to Iran, The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS, Did Muhammad Exist? Various others. Is the sound gone?
No, everything is okay. It's just it's been a mess with the arrangement of this chat. I'm very sorry for that.
No problem at all.
Yeah. So let's just go on. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. I wanted to talk to you briefly about things that I told you already before I would talk about. First, I would ask you to specify what exactly Jihad Watch is, and what exactly are you aiming to do with that?
Jihad Watch is dedicated to raising awareness of the motivating ideology behind the jihad threat, behind the primary terror threat that the world faces today. Don Lemon says that the primary terror threat that the United States faces is white men. He is basing his claim he is basing on studies that are faulty because they do not take into account the fact, they only count the number of people killed. They don't take into account the number of failed plots or the fact that there is not some right-wing extremist international terror threat, whereas there is an international jihad terror threat. And the motivating ideology of that terror threat from jihad has been largely ignored, obfuscated, covered up, and denied, not only by people such as Don Lemon, but by governing authorities and law enforcement officials. Jihad Watch is dedicated to raising awareness of it by reporting on jihad terror activity. Most of the material that we post is open source material from recognized and reputable news sources, but it's material that is very, very, very sparsely reported and that most people don't even know is happening. Just on Tuesday, I spoke in New York to a group, a very well-informed group, including some very prominent people. And I asked them, as a matter of example, did any of you hear about the young convert to Islam in South Carolina who planted homemade bombs in various areas around his county, rural area, and one of them exploded, and he threatened to send more that would be more powerful bombs and kill people. And none of them had heard of it. And so this is the kind of service that Jihad Watch performs, that we bring awareness of that kind of news story that needs to be known, that most people do not know.
Wonderful. I think sorry, I have some feedback here. Okay, well, I think the main issue why people don't get to those news is also that the media in the West especially always tries to paint the picture that that Islamic jihad, that Islamic terrorist attacks in the world are mostly just a result of extremism that most of the Muslims aren't actually fond of and don't actually want to see in this world. So and you are one of those people who say, no, this is actually a problem that we all are facing because of Islam, and here are some examples that you all can see. But why do you think we have this problem that that so many people, that even major organizations, even major media outlets insist that this is not a problem with Islam or with Islamic radicalism? Why do you think this is? Why do you think we need Jihad Watch and counter-jihad movements?
Well, there is a concerted effort to ignore, deny, obfuscate the motivating ideology behind jihad terror, as you yourself have very ably explained just now. This is a strange phenomenon, and the only thing we can conclude is that there are powerful people in the political sphere as well as in the media who don't want people knowing about the nature and magnitude of this threat. and they think that if they cover up news about it and don't explain to the people in their reports what the perpetrators were really about, who they were, and so on. In many European countries, it's even against the law to give the name of the perpetrators of various crimes, because most people would see that the perpetrators were invariably named things like Muhammad and Ahmed, and this would make people think, well, maybe it wasn't such a great idea to inundate our country with Muslim migrants. And so I think that it is those globalist socialist internationalists who are sponsoring the Muslim migrant inundation into the West, who don't want people to know that this kind of thing is going on, and that's why Jihad Watch is necessary.
Do you think beyond that there is also a problem that that many people in the West are just extremely misinformed about Islam? So many people out there in the West. I even tweeted this morning that it's very ironic that so many people who would be the first to be persecuted under Islamic rule come out and tell us about how Islam is so much more tolerant and misunderstood, and that we should, keep up our efforts in understanding it, especially after 9/11, that increased very much. I mean, do you think it's possible to get to that population and tell them the truth about Islam without being labeled a racist or a xenophobic white supremacist or whatever? How far do you think is that possible?
I mean, you're talking about leftists in the United States and in Western Europe. Yeah. They are told all the time that it's racist, bigoted, Islamophobic to speak about Islamic jihad terrorism. They are told that Islamophobia is a much bigger problem than jihad terrorism, even though there have been 30,000 plus jihad terror plots around the world since 9/11. And how many people have been killed by Islamophobes? Arguably one or two, but even those cases are disputed. In any case, the idea of speaking about these things, many people have become convinced on the left that it victimizes this poor, despised, harassed and persecuted group. Now, this is a lot of nonsense, really. FBI statistics show that hate crimes are much more common against Jews and others than they are against Muslims, which is not to justify them against anyone, but the idea that Muslims are facing wholesale persecution and harassment in the United States is ridiculous. But I think it's on that basis that a lot of people think that there is a big problem with discussing these issues, that it will put innocent people in danger. And also, yes, they've been told a false and misleading picture of Islam, so that they think that people like you and me are exaggerating or speaking out of some personal animus and making up these things, that these teachings are not really there, or Muslims don't really take them seriously. Last year, I spoke at University at Buffalo, but the speak part is even more inaccurate. I was yelled at for an hour and a half at the University of Buffalo. And one of the people who was there in the audience screaming at me for all this time was a young man who was actually silent, but he was holding a sign that said "Queers Against Islamophobia." And I thought, well, that's ironic. And I had a manual of Islamic law with me, so I opened it up to the part where it said that homosexuals should be put to death. And I read it out, and the whole place booed those who had heard what I said over the existing din. And I asked them, do you actually think that I wrote this? You think I made this up? You think that gays are not being thrown off rooftops in the ISIS domains and not being hung from cranes in Iran and so on? But yeah, they don't know those things, and they think that right-wing Islamophobes are exaggerating them, and they live in this fantasy world. Unfortunately, it is a fantasy, and it's going to be exploded sooner or later in one way or another.
I think that's even more a problem in America than it is in Europe. You know, in Europe we have several movements. We have actually bigger groups where even gay people, what we don't see in America, stand up and say, "Hey, I'm gay, and this religion is obviously the worst in my case. So I will stand up against this." And so we can see that even. Sorry.
We don't. You're right. We don't see that in America at all.
Not very much. Not very much. I mean, I have seen people who join me online, who are in America, who are homosexual, who join me online and say such things like, "Why would I be as stupid as to defend this religion that wants to kill me?" You know, but that's more marginalized even among gay people, even among gay activists in America. While in Europe, there is the presence of that felt. But even in that case, I see that that other organizations, especially LGBT support organizations, suddenly create these narratives that those gay people only speak against Islam because they have been deceived by far right politicians and far right activists into believing that Muslims are so homophobic.
Incredible.
Which is weird, because we can see in very publicly available global data that Muslims are the most homophobic, if we want to use that word, group in the world. You know,
Indeed.
and it gets very hard, and it gets very hard to actually tell people about this, to spread this information. I want to connect this to something that you experienced recently. You had this issue with Patreon. There was a confusion about your name, I guess. Could you explain what happened there?
No, it didn't have anything to do with my name. It just had to do with my work. I started a Patreon because I came into the possession of an old TV studio, and I thought, well, this might be fun. I'll fix it up and do regular Jihad Watch videos from it, and was raising money at Patreon for that. But they abruptly shut me down. They said that MasterCard had prevailed upon them to shut down my account. And that was because they actually never said why, but MasterCard answered a Breitbart inquiry and said that it was because I had illegal content on my website, which is a strange statement, since, of course, my website doesn't have any illegal content, unless, of course, you're judging by Islamic law. In that case, it's got plenty of illegal content in terms of blasphemy against Muhammad and Islam by criticizing them, by telling the truth about them.
But they didn't give you any specific example of what exactly was wrong about your work, right? About your website.
No, it was just judge, jury, executioner all in one. There was no appeal, no recourse. I'm trying to get lawyers to move on this, but I tell you, trying to get lawyers to move is trying to nail jelly to a wall.
Yeah, especially in the case of MasterCard and Patreon, I think they didn't even give you any option to appeal to this decision or to.
That's right.
They didn't do anything. Yeah, I thought at first. I think I followed your Twitter feed when that happened, and I thought at first that they just confused you with someone else who was easily.
A lot of people confused me with Richard Spencer, Nazi and a white supremacist. I am not a Nazi or a white supremacist, and my name isn't Richard. I don't know why people have so much trouble with Richard and Robert in that case. You never hear people say Robert Nixon or Robert Dawkins. Everybody knows their names are Richard. And you never hear about, what's that actor, Robert Downey? Nobody ever calls him Richard, you know? But when it comes to me, nobody can keep it straight. And I do wonder if it's malicious on the part of some people. But in any case, that was not in play in this. It was very clear that it was about me. And not about him. Nobody was making any name confusion there.
I'm just trying to make sense of that, because, you know, I have been doing my activities for about a year now, and I have said pretty harsh stuff on my channel that I thought YouTube would, you know, crack down on, or Patreon would do something about, but nothing happened. So, and I have been following your work. I mean, what you do is simply to point out things that happen in this world, point out things about Islam, write about the history of Islam, speak about it. I haven't seen anything that could be considered remotely illegal or anything, not in any Western country, let alone America.
Well, what I think happened was the Southern Poverty Law Center list is what MasterCard was using. The Southern Poverty Law Center, of course, is a very, very wealthy far-left advocacy group that claims to track hate groups. But of course, hate groups, as far as they're concerned, they are any group that opposes the leftist agenda. And so they have all kinds of perfectly legitimate organizations that never advocate for violence, that are talking about working within the American political system, don't call them for victimizing of anybody, but they are labeled hate groups. And that then real violent groups on the left, like Antifa, they won't label hate groups. Yeah. So in any case, the problem is that the Southern Poverty Law Center has has quite a great influence in the establishment media and elsewhere. And I believe what happened was, in this case, that MasterCard was working from their list of hate groups. And since I'm on that, they dropped me, but they didn't drop you because you're not on the list, at least as of yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Are we still doing this? Because I noticed that on my screen it says off air.
Oh no, that's fine. That's the problem that actually occurred at the beginning. It's supposed to ask me if we want to go on air, and then it should say on air, but it says off air, but we are live. That was the whole confusion. I have no idea what happened.
That's fine.
Sorry to all the audience for that problem, by the way, again. But thanks for being here. I remember that the Southern Poverty Law Center even announced Majid Nawaz and Ayan Hirsi Ali, I think, at some point as hate preachers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, Nawaz won a big judgment against them. Actually, he didn't win a judgment against them. He sued them, and they settled out of court and paid him $3.5 million for defaming him in this way. So I'm trying to get a lawyer to take up my case against the Southern Poverty Law Center. The problem is it's very much more difficult because Nawaz is a British citizen, and Britain has very libel laws that are very favorable to the plaintiff, whereas American libel laws are favorable to the defendant. And that's why many people ask me, well, why can't you sue them like Nawaz did? That's the big difference why.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that perspective. Uh-huh. Well, anyway, I'm still waiting to have the same honor to and join that list. I think I have to go a bit of a way until I get there. It's a
deep group.
it's an honorable thing to be called hateful and bigoted and racist and whatever by those people,
yes,
who just serve that one agenda. This new Western romance with Islam reminds me of something very new that happened just recently. It's not even new; it has been happening for decades now. But the case of Louis Farrakhan. I believe you are following that. He made some very problematic statements about Jews. He made statements before about white people, about others, about women, about homosexuals, and so on. And while we have seen that Twitter and other platforms like Facebook or YouTube took down people just for spreading misinformation or whatever, they are still tolerating Farrakhan, despite him doing things like calling Jews termites and bugs, and that Hitler was a great man, and that the Jews will be punished again, and stuff like that. Why do you think that is happening? I mean, Twitter has even been pushed very much to act on that, but Twitter hasn't done anything about it. The Women's March is still allied with Farrakhan, and so is Linda Sarsour and many other Democrats. What do you think is going on there?
The left is increasingly violent. It's increasingly unhinged. It's increasingly open in its anti-Semitism. And Louis Farrakhan's a leftist. So is the head of Twitter. And so are the people who run the Women's March. And so they all see eye to eye on these things. And so they just don't see that what he said was so bad. That's the first problem. The second problem, obviously, is just that they don't act against their own. They only act against people who oppose them. So if Farrakhan were somebody who was a conservative and he said that about Muslims, then he would have been long gone. But instead, he's a man of great power and influence on the left. You remember Aretha Franklin's funeral, and he's sitting there next to Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and Bill Clinton. And it's as if he is a man of stature on the par with the former president of the United States. But of course, it was just as scandalous that Sharpton, who caused a riot with his anti-Semitic fabrications and ruined people's lives with lies in New York City, it was up there. And Jackson, of course, is a huckster who has made millions of dollars on increasing racial tensions. And so all three of them really shouldn't have been there. But the fact that Farrakhan was included is an indication that the left just doesn't care about racism on the left or anti-Semitism on the left. If you're a good leftist, then all is forgiven and you have entree anywhere you want.
I find it extremely shameful, though, that there are so many people who disagree with them. So many right-leaning people, reasonable centrist people, anything. People who are for free speech, but also people who see the hypocrisy that's going on. And we don't have the power. We can't convince the people, convince these platforms that something is wrong here, that a double standard is going on, that they are tolerating a genocidal guy here who just gets a pass for that because of his skin color, because of his ties to the former president, and so on. This is, I don't know, it's just shameful that those people can do anything about anyone who says something about Islam, but we can't come together and do anything about their people who talk about genocide.
Well, they have all the power, all the influence, all the money, all the access.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have anything except the truth. And that's why they're so afraid of us, and that's why they shut us down. Because we don't have to have all the power that they have to make a difference. Because all people have to do to see that we're right is open their eyes and pay attention. Whereas for them to get across their view of the world, they have to keep pounding it and repeating it and coming up with more big lies all the time. Mm-hmm. And so it's a shame, yes, that the playing field is so tilted. It's a shame that we don't have the access or influence that people like Farrakhan have. But at the same time, it matters less because he has to work a lot harder to put over his lies than we do to put over the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The truth is just reality. It is what it is. It's obvious to everyone. And pretty soon, it will be patently obvious to everyone that we were right about Islam.
Absolutely. I hope so. Well, one thing...
I don't hope so, because it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, that's true. Well, one thing I want to say is, while talking about anti-Semitism, there is this big problem going on in Europe right now. It's not as big in America currently, and hopefully won't be. But in Europe, in France, in Germany, in so many other countries, we have seen that the Jewish communities in Europe are getting more and more concerned about their well-being and their future. And we have even seen not reports from Islamophobic sources, but reports from quite neutral, from quite reliable, trusted by everyone, sources that told us that Jews are feeling less and less safe in Europe and more concerned about their future. And we see attacks against Jews. We see people carrying slogans in the streets about punishing Jews and so on. When I say that this anti-Semitism has not much to do with the Israel conflict, this anti-Semitism is a fundamental part of Islam. People usually don't want to believe that. They want to go around that and think, yeah, well, we shouldn't talk about it that much. What would you say to those people? I believe you wrote about the history of anti-Semitism in part of one of your books already, largely.
Yeah, well, I've written about it in several books, but most comprehensively in the new book, The History of Jihad, mm-hmm. where I show that Islamic anti-Semitism is something that runs through Islamic history, that everywhere that Muslims have gone that have been anti-Semitic, they have victimized and brutalized Jews. This is very important because a lot of people believe in historical myths about how Jews had wonderful treatment in Islamic lands and that they preferred them to Christian lands, which is historically inaccurate. As a matter of fact, just on the basis of the fact that people vote with their feet, there were 18 million Jews in the world at the beginning of the 20th century, and 17 million of them were in Europe and 1 million in Islamic lands. And that was no accident. They knew where life was better. Now, this was because Islamic law institutionalizes anti-Semitism. And the Quran says, of course, in chapter 5, verse 82, that the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims and so on. So this is why Jews are feeling more threatened in Europe today, because obviously there's this massive influx of Muslim migrants. And so in many places, in Germany and France in particular, Jews are afraid to go outside with any visible sign of their faith, a kippah or Star of David necklace or something of this kind, because they'll be victimized. And even rabbis and Jewish associations have told people not to wear any insignia that shows that they're Jewish when they go out. Otherwise, they could be in serious trouble and be assaulted.
Mhm.
So this is nothing that should surprise us, really, because Muslims have behaved this way for 1400 years. And so it's in their holy book. Why should we think that they're going to act any differently?
Absolutely. I made a series about this before here on this channel about the Islamic war on Jews, how it was in the Quran, how it was in Muhammad's time, how it also continued throughout history. I mean, we can see so many atrocities against Jews in the history of Islam, and even in those times where Muslims claim that Muslims were so tolerant, in Andalus, in Spain. One of the biggest massacres even happened there. The Granada massacre happened there at that time, and things have just been going on that way forever. And the Israel conflict is nothing new. In fact, if you look at the Israel conflict, you see that Israel is very much not to blame in many conflicts that happened and cost more lives on the other side than on the Israeli side.
That's something that's very important that people don't know, because there are all these peace processes, and going back to Camp David and all that, there were all these attempts to negotiate a peace settlement with the Israelis and the Palestinians, and they all failed. And I could have told them, they're going to fail. You're wasting your time. You're wasting your money. They're going to fail. Of course, nobody was asking. And so I'll tell you, the next one's going to fail too, because the Islamic Jihad imperative is maximalist and absolute, and it's going to continue until Israel is destroyed. And so the Palestinians might negotiate to gain some short-term advantages, but never to establish some kind of a lasting peace.
Mm-hmm. What's also ironic to watch that people on the Gaza Strip are going out to protest violently against Israel when they don't have any reason to do that, since many people don't know, but there is absolutely no conflict going on in the Gaza Strip. Actually, if the Gazan Palestinians stopped protesting violently and going over the border, there is absolutely nothing going on. Israel retreated out of that region years ago.
Yes, we were told then that once Israel left, then there would be peace. The Gazans would establish farms and whatever else gainful. They would be turning to peaceful professions, because the occupation, which was supposedly the source of all their problems, would be over. And Mortimer Zuckerman, the American publisher, he bought up the greenhouses that the Jews had established in Gaza for $14 million and gave them to the Palestinians, so that the Palestinians would have gainful employ once the Jews left. And immediately as they left, the Palestinians turned those greenhouses into weapon smuggling tunnels from Sinai and used them for the jihad, and they were destroyed. These things, there was never any attempt to establish any kind of peaceful economy or peaceful society in Gaza. The whole society is directed toward destroying Israel in the name of jihad and Islam.
What's also funny is I was reading very recently about how the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, is handling things like martyrdom and praising martyrs who die while protesting Israel and so on. And the Palestinian Authority, the legal one, has only very recently, only a few years ago, stopped praising martyrs publicly, but then gave the same mission to different organizations within the Palestinian Authority. When talking about Gaza, we're basically talking about Hamas today, and we can't expect anything peaceful from Hamas anyway, which is a surprise to some people. I don't know why. But even on the Palestinian Authority, that is supposed to be peaceful and diplomatic in relations with Israel, is still continuing these narratives of poor Palestinians who are just fighting for their lands and are getting martyred by the evil Israeli state. It's just really hard to make people understand what's really going on there without having them fall into a romance with Palestinian activists who tell this narrative of an oppressed Palestinian nation nowadays.
Well, you're going up against a wealthy and well-organized, sophisticated propaganda effort, and it fools many people. Mm-hmm. But anybody who takes the trouble to look at what's coming out of the Palestinian Authority will see the truth. Just go to the Palestinian Media Watch online or Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI, and they track what's on Palestinian television. And I'm talking about official PATV, and you see it's genocidal incitement on a regular basis, and open anti-Semitism. And people aren't aware that these things are not just broadcast once or twice, which would be bad enough, but on a regular and ongoing basis.
It's even interesting if, people who have never been to the Islamic world, who don't know how the Islamic world looks like, who don't know what the media looks like because they don't understand the language, always assume that we hear only Western anti-Islamic propaganda about the Islamic world, and that the Muslim world just wants to live in peace and everything, which is very ridiculous to me, because I have lived in that world, and I have lived in one of the mildest countries of that world, which is Turkey. And even Turkish TV is so unbelievable. If you grow up in the West, then you go to Turkey and watch TV there and see how the news speak about Europeans and about Jews and Israel, you would be totally shocked.
Yeah.
And no one would say things anymore like, oh, it's just propaganda, they don't actually do that over there. But then if you go into the Arab world, it gets even worse. You can see very clear examples of TV in the Arab Islamic world that incites so much brutal hatred and violence against the West, against Jews and Israel, that it's even worse than far right racist sources here in the West, which is pretty funny to me.
Borne in mind that also in wonderful secular Turkey, Mein Kampf is a perennial bestseller.
Yes,
and that's no accident, because what Hitler writes in Mein Kampf coincides with Islamic anti-Semitism and what's written in the Quran and the Sunnah about the Jews.
See, I have so many times heard in Turkey people say things like, "Oh, Hitler was actually a great man. I wish he had been our leader." Stuff like that. It's a pretty common thing to say in Turkey among many people. As you said, Mein Kampf is doing very well for a reason, and we can also understand Islam a bit if we listen to Hitler, who openly praised Islam for how great it would be as a religion that inspires people to fight instead of praying and being peaceful, as Christianity does.
Yes, he was sorry that Charles Martel defeated the Muslims at Tours in 732 in France, because he had hoped that if the Muslims had won there, and then they would have been able to overrun the whole continent, and Germany would have been Muslim. And then he thought nobody would have been able to beat them, because this martial militaristic spirit that is in Islam would have been inculcated in the German people for 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I want to say something quickly to the audience. We'll probably be going on about a half an hour or so with our regular talk. I see many questions directed at Robert Spencer or at me. I would say if you have questions, please save them for later. I will announce when I take questions, and you can just, if you write your questions with an @Robert Spencer at the beginning, it would be easier to sort them out and to direct them directly to Robert. Anyway, sorry. We're talking about anti-Semitism in Islam. There are also a lot of anti-Christian elements in Islam. I think when we dive into this anti-Semitism in Islam, we just get lost there because it's so huge, the anti-Semitism that is in the Islamic world and also in Islamic scripture. But just as well as I do, that Islam in general is very xenophobic and also has a lot of anti-Christian elements. Directly in the Quran, in the Hadith, and also in the life of Muhammad and afterwards.
Yes, Islam actually presents itself as the true version of the message of Jesus and the message of Moses and the message of all the biblical prophets. It's the true and correct version in the Quran. The idea is that Jesus, as well as Moses and Abraham and all the others, were Muslims. The Quran is explicit in saying this in chapter 3, verse 64. Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian. He was a Muslim. Actually, I think that's 367. I don't have it in front of me. It's 367 or 364. People can check, but it's in one of those two. Abraham was a Muslim, and the idea is that that's true of all of the prophets as well as of Jesus. They were Muslims who taught Islam, and Islam is the original religion of mankind. And then it was their wicked followers who twisted and hijacked their teachings to create Judaism and Christianity. And that's where we get this supremacist and triumphalist idea in Islam, that it is not just superior to all the other religions, but it is actually the correct form of the other Abrahamic religions at very least. Then the religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism and so on, that's just paganism that all has to be wiped out. And they do not have the status of, they do not have the option of submission, of subjugation as dhimmis that the people of the book, the Jews, Christians, and others have.
You know, I can't even make sense of that. I mean, I was a very religious Muslim in my time for years, and I studied Islam in and out. And just one thing didn't make sense to me, and it still doesn't make sense to me. I want to ask you what you think of that. You know, Muslims tell this narrative, or Islam tells this narrative of how Jesus was actually one of the most important prophets of Allah, and he will come back again at the end of times, and he brought the gospel and this and that. But then when Muslims allege that Christians corrupted the message of Jesus, then we have to assume, accepting that from an Islamic perspective, that Islam doesn't have any teaching that Jesus actually brought. So from the Quran's perspective, from Islam's perspective, sending Jesus as a prophet was an absolute failure because Jesus didn't bring anything that Muslims have now.
Well, you're thinking too much. Remember, in chapter 5, verse 101, it says, don't ask questions. Some people have lost their faith because they ask questions. And you are actually being rational about the Islamic teaching, which is actively discouraged in Islam and in the Quran itself. The idea about Jesus is that the Quran contains the real teachings that he brought, but he only says a couple things in the Quran. And the Quran actually directs in chapter 5, I think it's 64, but in any case, it's in chapter 5. The Quran directs Muslims to, Christians rather. It says if Christians abide by what's in the gospel, they'll be rightly guided. It's 546, baby. It's anyway, it's in there in the middle part of chapter 5. And so if Christians, and in 1094 and 95, and I'm sure of those verses, then Muhammad is told to check with the people of the book, the people who have the scriptures before him, if he's in doubt about what he's learning. And so in both cases, it's assumed that the Christian gospel is not tampered with. The problem is that it does not confirm the Quran, it contradicts the Quran. And so Islam had to elaborate this idea that the Christian gospel and the Hebrew scriptures have been tampered with. But actually the Quran is confused because it tells the Christians to abide by what's in the Gospels, which if they do, then they will be abiding by all kinds of things that Islam says is false. So it just doesn't make any sense. And if you start thinking about it, you'll leave Islam.
That was actually one of the main reasons why I left Islam in the end. You know, what you just explained. When I was at this stage of really questioning my religion, being completely exhausted by this questioning and all, I thought one good thing that is left that I could do would be to start reading the Bible. Because Islam claims to be connected to them. Islam claims that they came from the same source, but Muslims also claim it has been corrupted. Only then, actually, did I notice the pattern in the Quran, which which contradicts itself, which says that the gospel and the Torah are from Allah, and that if the Jews and the Christians follow those books, they will be guided rightly. And when I went into that, I looked at all the contradictions between the Quran and the Bible, and they are the contradictions are so problematic. They're not just basic information contradictions. They are such big contradictions where you can't believe that the same God sent those two books. That's absolutely not possible.
Yeah, they're flat, open, unalterable contradictions, because the Quran says, chapter 19, verse 35, far be it from Allah's transcendent majesty that he should have a son. And many, many other passages in the Quran. Allah does not have a son, cannot have a son, must not have a son, because that would imply that he's incomplete, that he needs a son to help him finish his work, whereas Allah is all-powerful and incomplete and self-sufficient. So in the New Testament, it says he does not have the son, does not have the father. So you can't have both. They can't both come from the same source. Either they're both wrong, or one of them is right and one of them is wrong, but they can't both be from the same divine source.
Well, I think one of the most problematic things that also made me doubt it is the Kaaba. You know, Islam puts so much importance on the Kaaba. The Quran says that it is Allah's house, Allah's most valued place, most valued building, Allah's only temple, and stuff like that. And while the Quran makes that claim, and if we assume that it was right, that is indeed Allah's most important building, then we should also be able to find that same mention of the Quran and that same importance of the Quran in the Bible, right? But there is absolutely no mention of it.
Yeah, Abraham is supposed to have built it along with Ishmael. And so, yeah, you would think that there might be some mention of that in the Bible, but there is not. It's just an Arabic legend.
Yeah. Some Muslim apologists even go so far as to claim that that there are some references in the Bible that do indeed talk about the Kaaba, but that's absolutely not true. And they're mentioning stuff like one line from the Psalms, you know, about some temple or some pilgrimage place or whatever. But that I think is one very important thing that skeptical Muslims and any Muslim should think about, should spend some thought about. That if the Kaaba is so important to Allah, and Allah is supposed to be the God behind the Bible, then why was it never mentioned in the Bible, although it was there from the very beginning, according to the Quran? That really makes no sense, and all those questions can very easily bring you to leave Islam.
Yeah. Also, in the Quran, Jesus is the word of God, which is never said of Muhammad. Jesus is sinless in Islamic tradition, which is not true of Muhammad, although he's treated as sinless. In the Quran, in chapter 80, he's rebuked for sinning by turning away from the poor man and preaching only to the rich. And Jesus is going to return at the end of the world. Muhammad isn't. Jesus does miracles, and in the Quran, many, many, many times, it says, Muhammad's miracle is this book. He's not going to do any other miracles. Don't ask him for other miracles. And so you have this, the word of God, who is sinless, who's returning at the end of the world and does miracles. And none of those things are true of Muhammad, and yet Muhammad is the greater prophet. That also creates cognitive dissonance. I've known many people to leave Islam as a result of pondering on that.
Totally understandable. One interesting thing that I want to talk with you about is something that concerns moderate Muslims of our time. What do you think if Muhammad came back today in our time? Yeah, I know it's not possible, but if he was alive in today's time,
I hope he doesn't come to my house.
If he came today, where would he fit in society? What would we label him? What would we call him in America? How would the American public, the media, and the Muslim world treat him? What do you think?
He would be joining ISIS. He would be the leader of ISIS. He'd be called a terrorist. He'd be hunted down on most wanted terrorist lists. The moderate Muslims in the United States would denounce him and say he has nothing to do with Islam. This is the cognitive dissonance that the moderate Muslims have, that the Islamic texts and teachings enjoin terror, warfare, violence. Muhammad said, I have been made victorious with terror. And the Quran tells Muslims, strike terror in the hearts of the enemies of Allah, chapter 8, verse 60. And that's not just an isolated verse. Allah says, soon we will strike terror in the unbelievers, chapter 3, verse 151. Chapter 8, verse 12. Strike terror in the unbelievers, cut off their heads and their fingertips. These things, incidentally, the Saudis are said to have cut off the head and the fingertips of Jamal Khashoggi. I wonder where they got that idea. But, anyway, Muhammad would do these things. This is what he taught. And if he did these things today, he would be seen as a bloodthirsty outlaw and an international pariah, and not as a revered founder of a great world religion with people like Karen Armstrong writing books about him and saying he's just like Gandhi. On the other hand, the world is so crazy today. Maybe if somebody like that showed up, there would be people saying, wow, what a great, wonderful, peaceful man, because the left is so nuts today, you never know.
Yeah. Well, do you think one of the major issues why Islam is still believed in by many people who are not quite like Islam, like normal people in our time? Do you think Islam is still well alive today, majorly because many Muslims who claim to be peaceful or who want to be peaceful don't really understand Islam and don't really know about what Muhammad really was like?
Yeah, that's one reason, but there are many others. One reason is, as you say, yes, you have to pray in Arabic, and you might not know Arabic. In Pakistan, boys in madrasas memorize the whole Quran without knowing any Arabic. So they have no idea what they're reciting. They just recite it. And there are many, many millions of Muslims around the world who don't know Arabic, and they don't know what they're reciting. They might know some, but they don't have any idea of the fullness of the violence of the teachings. And so they assume that it's all peaceful and wonderful because that's what the apologists tell them. And also there are many Muslims who know what's in there, but they don't want to live it out, either from fear or just from the fact that they're just not that devout and would rather have a family and a life and a job and take care of themselves, and that's it. You have many Muslims who have no interest in this whatsoever, but there's a great deal of conformism in Islamic communities. You just don't leave Islam. If you're not going to be killed, you'll be mocked and ridiculed, shunned, ostracized, lose your friends, maybe lose your family. Most people don't want to do that, even if they know what's in there and they don't like it. And so they'll just go along. But at the same time, will those people stand with non-Muslims when it comes down to actual open jihad against the West? That I think doubtful.
Yeah, well, I can confirm that in the Muslim community, even among Western Muslims, even among people who talk about how the world should be, how we are peaceful, how we should be tolerant, and this and that Islam is tolerant too. Even those who are who can't really be considered religious Muslims because they are so much influenced by Western values. Even among them, there is still this thought well alive that the world should convert to Islam, that the world will convert to Islam, and that in the end we will join. That in the end the Muslim will join the Redeemer, the Mahdi, and the false. The corrupt Islamic form of Jesus that's supposed to return in the end, and fight against the Jews and all the non-believers that are in the way of Islam. That's something that is even among those moderate Muslims, that as we call them nowadays, ironically. So
yeah, also I think it should be said, Bosch Falston, the cartoonist.
Which one is that?
Well, I'll tell you. He is a graphic artist, and he was a Muslim. He was raised a Muslim, but he left Islam, and he was the winner of our Muhammad art exhibit and cartoon contest that was fired upon by ISIS jihadis in Texas in 2015.
Oh,
and before ISIS showed up, he gave a speech that I recommend everybody watch. It's available on YouTube, at least for now. And he says that he grew up in a secular Muslim household. They were Muslims, but they were not observant. They were not religious, and they didn't read the Quran and so on. They didn't go to mosque, but they all learned to hate Jews and mistreat women. That was in the air. It was among all his relatives. It was taken for granted and never questioned.
Mm-hmm. I learned the same things too. It's hard to make people understand in the West about how Islamic upbringing actually looks like. But I grew up in a rather religious family, but my family was not a fundamentalist family. My family was a Sufi family, a religious Sufi family, and Sufis are usually not as crazy as fundamentalist Muslims are.
And you're from Turkey? Where are you from in Turkey?
Central regions.
My family's from what is now Western Turkey, in Chesme, and on the coast.
Oh, I've been there once. Yeah.
They were exiled for not converting to Islam.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, was it at the beginning of the century or?
Yeah, well, right
Yeah.
at the end of World War One.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's when the whole exchange happened.
Yeah.
Sad thing. Yeah. Anyway, so I have learned those same things from my family, also from others, from religious Muslim communities around us. No matter how, I'm saying this because so many people see those regular, modern, moderate Muslims who don't appear in any way radical or terrorist or violent or whatever. You know, I was in such an environment with people who didn't appear in any way radical, who didn't appear violent or anything at all. But even among them, the teachings were quite well alive in everyone's brain and everyone's learning of this religion. That in the end, all the Muslims will gather and will take their arms and fight against the non-believers, led by the Dajjal and the Jews. And this famous hadith, which I like to cite very often when talking about Islam and tolerance, about the end times, about how the Jews will find the Muslims, and the Muslims will kill every Jew in every corner, behind every stone, every tree, and only one tree will protect the Jews. And you know, people, when I talk to people about this, people think that it's just some source, just some text in some old Islamic text, but that's not the case. So many people in our time, many know this. I would say most of the Muslims, even in the West, in Europe, in America, know about this and believe in that.
Oh yeah, very much so. And imams all over the country in the United States have been videoed in recent years quoting it and calling for the killing of the Jews. It's and in Europe as well. It's not at all obscure and not at all unknown. Unfortunately, it's quite well known and central. About 10 years ago, David Horowitz and I led an initiative to try to get Islamic groups to repudiate that hadith, to denounce it as genocidal, which it is. And none of them would do it, of course, because how are they going to denounce the words of Muhammad? And that was, of course, what we expected. But most people who are not Muslims and not paying attention to these things, they have no idea that these things even exist.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to make a little twist and be a little bit fair to some moderate Muslims in our time, and mention that there is quite an interesting thing going on in our time, which is that that there is an interesting number of Muslims who have a problem with hadiths, with narrations about the Prophet, with narrations about the Prophet marrying Aisha at a young age, or killing Jews, or teaching intolerance, and this and that. You know, so many hadith are suddenly labeled unauthentic, and I don't want to believe in that by many modern Muslims. So I believe there is kind of a little change going on, not really in general with Islam, but there are little communities that are making this little change.
Well, do you mind if I respectfully be pessimistic about that?
Yes, absolutely.
I'll take that as meaning no. The thing is that you're talking about Quranists who believe only in the Quran, right? And they want to reject the Hadith because they give the idea that the Hadith is full of the bad things like Muhammad marrying the child and so on. But
not only them, I don't even take them seriously. I mean, there are some Muslims who do accept hadith to some extent, but then reject all the bad hadith that they don't like, you know?
Okay, but that's rejecting hadith on the basis of what suits modern sensibilities and what doesn't. There's no basis for that at all. And also, the Quran is bad enough itself. Even if you do reject all the hadith,
Mm-hmm.
you still have child marriage, even without Aisha, because chapter 65, verse 4 of the Quran gives rules for divorce. And it says these rules apply even to those who have not yet menstruated, which means that what is being contemplated is not just the marriage, but also the divorce of girls who have not yet reached puberty, marrying children. So, of course, also there are many, many exhortations to violent jihad. Kill them wherever you find them is 3 times in the Quran, 2:191, 489, and 9:5. When you meet the unbelievers, strike the necks, behead them. That's 47:4. Also 8:12 that I mentioned before. So many, many things in the Quran itself, even if you cut away all the hadith. And yes, though, you're right. The hadith have no basis in reality. They're all fabricated 150 years to 200 years after Muhammad died. or is supposed to have died. There's no indication that anybody knew of their existence before that. So you're not talking about just oral tradition, you're talking about outright fabrication. In my book, Did Muhammad Exist?, I show that really there isn't any basis for thinking that he did. There may have been some warlord named Muhammad, but all the mountain of detail that we are told about him in the Hadith has no historical basis, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Would you say, though, that that some kind of change in Islam is possible? I mean, we have people nowadays like Majid Nawaz or Imam Tawhidi who you know who are trying to tell us that a different way is possible, who are trying to change Islam from within and to reform Islam.
I wish them well. If they get some large following among Muslims, then call me. But right now, they're much more popular among non-Muslims than they are among Muslims.
Yeah, that's what I always say when I'm confronted with that. I mean, both of them don't have any Muslim fans, don't have any Muslim followers who trust them. They are
a few, but not many.
Yeah, they're talking basically mostly to ex-Muslims and to critics of Islam, which is interesting. What do you think the future of Islam looks like? I mean, I don't know. You might be too pessimistic about this, but I'm still asking about your opinion. What do you think?
Anything is possible. I would never say history is so full of unexpected twists. I would never say it's impossible that there could be some change in Islam to make it peaceful, but I don't see how that could happen. Maybe it could happen in a way I don't see. I wouldn't rule it out, but I just don't see how it could happen. Chapter 5, verse 3 of the Quran says, "This day I have perfected your religion for you." You can't fix what's perfect. It's already fixed. It's already as good as it's going to be. Reformers in Islam have always been charged with being guilty of bid'ah, innovation, which is a major sin, and killed as a result. Mahmoud Muhammad Taha was a reformer in Sudan in 1985. He was executed by the Sudanese government for teaching that the peaceful verses should take precedence over the violent ones. So I don't see the future of Islam being much different from its past. In the book, The History of Jihad, I showed that the history of Jihad is pretty much the same for 1400 years. They've been waging war against non-Muslims in various ways and still are doing so.
Yeah, we have some new developments in our time due to the spread of technology. We see in the Islamic world an increase in people leaving Islam very much. I have recently pointed out that in many countries, like in Saudi Arabia, in Turkey, in Jordan, and many other countries, even religious authority has started raising concerns about increasing apostasy, atheism, and interest in other religions in the Islamic world within the country, especially among the youth.
Yeah.
Do you think there is hope to that? Do you think that should give us hope that Islam might lose many of its believers in the next decades or centuries, or do you think that's just?
Yeah, look, the fact is that Islam has a death penalty for apostasy, as you well know. And so many people leave Islam without ever telling anyone they've left Islam. But it's unlikely that they're going to do anything significant to aid the global jihad. And so the numbers that Islam has, the numbers that are claimed for the population of Muslims around the world, there has to be subtracted from that a very significant number that just isn't on board with the program. And so if the Islamic world is not nearly as formidable as it may appear.
Yeah, I see. Thanks very much for your opinion on that. I just caught a question here in the live chat that I found interesting and wanted to take immediately. It's also a super chat by someone called The Infidel. I don't talk very much about Shia Muslims and Shia Islam. To be fair, and many people ask about it because the Shia Islam has a history of being kind of persecuted at many faces by Sunni Muslims, so much that they started lying about their religion and what they actually believe in. And some people get the idea to sympathize with Shia Muslims a bit more because Shia Muslims are or don't appear to be the ones who are involved very much in global terrorism. I would say carefully, global terrorism. You know what I mean? Would you say that there is a big difference between Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims? And if if there is any, if infidels, non-believers have any hope with Shia Muslims, or do you think we are just playing the same game with them?
It's not a difference of belief, it's a difference of strategy. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but in 1979, at the time of the Islamic Revolution in Iran and the hostage crisis, there were a lot of learned analysts out there saying the problem is the Shia, the Sunnis, they're okay. And then we started to see the large scale activity of groups like Al Qaeda and ISIS, and now there are people saying the opposite. And the difference is this: the Sunnis go in for, the Sunni jihad groups go in for terror attacks like 9/11 and lone wolf attacks, Muslims stabbing people on the street or running their cars into crowds of infidels. These things are done by Sunnis almost completely. Shia don't generally do them.
Mm-hmm.
But the Islamic Republic of Iran is a Shiite state and is dedicated to waging jihad against the United States as much as the Sunnis are. But they're doing it. They have Hezbollah training the drug cartels in Mexico, and they are financing leftist political parties in Spain and elsewhere to try to subvert the existing order. So in a certain sense, the Shiites are working more cleverly for the long term in trying to destroy Western civilization. But they have the same goal. They're just going about it through different means.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I don't know. I find it always a bit of a tough issue to talk about the Shia world and Shia Islam, especially in our time, and especially a few decades after the Iranian Revolution happened, because everything just seems puzzled right now. So, but yeah, I appreciate your input on that.
Most people are sick of the regime, but they're also sick of Islam because the regime is so closely identified with Islam. The regime is so very Islamic that a lot of people in Iran have had it with Islam because they've lived under it as a tyranny for 40 years, and so they see what it is.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you so much, Robert. I would like to direct some questions at you now from the viewers,
Yes.
who are sending quite interesting questions. I haven't been able to follow all of them directly, but I'll just pick some that I think are relevant, that come often, and will direct them to you. So one question, sorry. Okay, asked by Hichi Ramputra is, what are your thoughts about Ahmadiyya Muslims? How do you think they are different? And do you think they are different?
I'm not a fan. Yeah, they're different. But they're 1.8% of Muslims worldwide. And they are persecuted as heretical because they believe in this Messiah, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who's a 19th century figure. They are considered heretical and are persecuted. They're not even allowed to call themselves Muslims in Pakistan. And they're violently persecuted in Pakistan and Indonesia, which is where they're mostly concentrated. But what's very strange about them is that in the U.S., their spokesman, notably Qasim Rashid, Haris Zafar, Kashif Chowdhury, they are completely aligned with the people who are persecuting them in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. They're on board with the Muslim Brotherhood program of deception, of civilization jihad. They are rude and vile toward critics of Islam, even those who defend them against who speak up about the persecution of the Ahmadis. So, and I find them so personally obnoxious. Whenever they come to numerous events where I speak and they try to dominate the proceedings, take over the event, won't stop talking. Very, very rude and obnoxious people in general. Obviously, I'm sure there are some who are lovely. I just haven't met them yet.
Well, there is this. I find it ironic, though, that Ahmadiyya Muslims try to kind of tell us this try to paint this picture that Islam is actually totally misunderstood and peaceful and beautiful and this and that, while most Muslims totally disagree with them, and while most Muslims view them as heretics and hypocrites and just merely infidels. isn't that's a bit weird to me, that they can actually do that they can be persecuted and also claim that Islam is totally peaceful and misunderstood at the same time.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's very strange because they're essentially, guys like Qasim Rashid are essentially carrying water for their persecutors and aiding and abetting the persecution. And yet the Ahmadiyya, obviously, they're on board with that. They have him as their chief spokesman, so in the U.S. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. I would want to revise one question and direct it to you, asked by Persia Will Rise Again. The question is to you, it is there a chance to disqualify Islam as a religion? But I would say, would you say that Islam can be called a religion, or would you rather agree with the method of calling Islam a political ideology rather than a religion?
Well, I don't really think it's an either or. I know there are a lot of people who like to say that Islam is not a religion, it's a political ideology. I think Islam is obviously a religion. A religion claims to connect people with the divine. Islam claims to connect people with the divine. So it's a religion. But it's also a political system that is a supremacist, authoritarian, violent, aggressive, expansionist, and absolutist, and thus incompatible with the U.S. Constitution in numerous ways. I think it ultimately, to be the most accurate, we would need to recognize that it is a religion as well as a political system, and that the political system is in contradiction to American constitutional freedoms in numerous particulars.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I try to call it more of a political system recently. Yeah, but I would totally agree with you on that. Asked by Farley Moab, do you think that that something in Iran can be changed if it's not done from the outside, like the Arab Alliance and America? Do you think that that the government, that the regime of Iran can be successfully overthrown by movements inside that are currently emerging?
I have no doubt about it. I think it's only a matter of time.
So you think it would happen? It would change?
Yeah, it's very clear. The things I see coming out of Iran, they're very exciting. I've seen, for example, videos of an entire soccer stadium full of people, 40,000, 50,000 people, and they're all chanting, "Long live Reza Shah," the Shah before the one who was deposed. They don't want the Islamic regime, and I don't think that it's going to last long. There's no opposition that has developed because, of course, any opposition is furiously persecuted in Iran. But I'm confident at this point, with so much rebellion against the regime, that there are groups that are coalescing underground, and that we're going to be hearing about them before too long.
I hope it doesn't end up in a bloody and dramatic way.
I hope not, but I expect that it probably will.
Yeah, most likely. With such a cruel regime, we can't expect it to end very peacefully and just everyone just changes the way they rule things. Another thing I would like to ask you is, what do you personally think about measures in the West like the niqab or burqa ban? Do you think it's an effective way of dealing with the issue, and why?
Yeah, it's a good step, but it can't be the only step. It is an assertion that we're going to protect our own culture and mores in the West. There have been rules against covering your face in the United States in public ever since, in the Wild West, bandits would go around with scarves on their over their faces so you couldn't see who they were. It was a matter of public security. It was a matter of deterring criminal activity. And so the idea now that these laws are being overturned because we don't want to be Islamophobic is short-sighted in light of the fact that there have been now bank robberies by men wearing burqas or niqabs, and nobody knows who they are, and there's not going to be any way to tell. So banning the face veil is a simple matter of common sense and ought to be followed through with further reassertions of our own culture and mores, as opposed to surrendering constantly to Islamic culture and mores whenever the two are in contradiction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Uh, Additionally to that, that's not a question that came from here, but it's on my mind. I saw proposals recently from political parties in Europe that made suggestions like changing the Quran that is publicly available or that is in mosques. I know that this is received with a lot of controversy and criticism and skepticism in Europe, in European politics. Do you think it's an effective way to go to regulate, to take the Quran and to regulate it on a state basis, so that state organs or anything within the country takes control of it and regulates the Quran and dictates which Quran version is allowed in the mosque and which one is not?
All you're going to get from that is underground Qurans that Muslims produce themselves and pass around, or that the Saudis smuggle into the country or whatever. There's not going to be any acceptance of the revised Quran. As a matter of fact, there'll be a lot of contempt for it as being a creation of the state, and the Muslims who might accept it will be derided by other Muslims, possibly even physically assaulted, but criticized as giving into the state in its desire to create a defanged Islam and discarding the real deal. The Quran says what it says. The only thing that the West can do and should do is make it very clear to Muslims that any activity that is in service of behavior that is against the law in the West will be prosecuted. Right now, there's polygamy all over Britain and Western Europe and in the United States, and nobody is enforcing the law that is against polygamy because it would be Islamophobic. If we started to enforce the law against polygamy, the law against female genital mutilation, laws against subversion and sedition, then we would be able to deal with the jihad problem a great deal more effectively than we're doing so now. But people aren't daring to enforce those laws right now because they're pandering to the Muslim communities.
Do you think, back to the Quran thing, do you think there is any way we could efficiently regulate the Quran, or do you think we shouldn't even think about that?
I don't see how that could possibly be done. The only thing you're going to do there is just create a version of the Quran that most Muslims aren't going to take seriously, and the other version will be circulated underground.
I'm asking this question because
out there for 1,400 years, there are billions of copies available. What are you going to do? Go around and seize them all and burn them? It's not even practical, even if it were desirable. But I'm not in favor of book burning. I'd just rather make it very clear that any activity inspired by the book that is against the law or is subversive and seditious is going to be prosecuted as such. We're going to enforce our own laws and defend our own national character and our culture.
Yeah. I'm asking this question because I don't know if you have been seeing that, but recently there has been a controversy in Germany about that. The right-wing party AfD made such a suggestion in the parliament, and then
it's a good idea for them to do that, make the suggestion, because it creates a national discussion about the fact that the Quran does teach violence and hatred and misogyny and Islamic anti-Semitism and so on. And so that's all to the good. But the idea of banning the book, well, the Germans have a bad history with that, and they shouldn't be talking about that.
Yeah, that's problematic indeed. All right, thank you for your views on that. Viewer USA asked, what do you think is the we in the Quran? Why does the Quran refer to its own narrator as we all the time?
Because the Quran is a mishmash, an amalgamation of Jewish and Christian texts. And of course, in Christianity, there's the Trinity. But even if you read the book of Genesis, God is referring to himself as we on several occasions. And so it is an idea, I believe, that is derived from the Trinity and from the Jewish word Elohim, which is originally plural and refers to the one God. And so it's a remnant of the plurality and unity that Christianity envisions of God. But just like with what we were discussing about Jesus before, that he's the word of God and sinless and will return at the end of the world and so on, these things are incorporated into the Quran without any understanding and without any larger theological superstructure to explain them. So in the Quran, it's just a flat royal we, like Queen Elizabeth saying, we are not amused, off with his head. She doesn't say that, I know, but the cliche of English kings or whatever. And there's no really reason for it to happen at all. But it is one more indication that the Quran is a book written by committee from pre-existing texts that were of a different theological character. As I explained in my book, Did Muhammad Exist?
Mm-hmm. All right. What do you think about the recent issue? This is a question by Guy Caesar that happened in the European Court of Human Rights. I believe you have seen that. They ruled it was a right decision to fine a woman for calling Muhammad a pedophile. I made a video about that recently, talked about it, that it's horrible news. But do you think it has any impact on our future, on the future of Europe, on freedom of speech? What do you think about that?
Yeah, very much so. It's a very dire, disturbing ruling. It's a Sharia ruling, of course, because Sharia forbids criticism of Islam and Muhammad and the Quran. And so it's an indication that Europe is capitulating to Sharia norms. They would never say this about criticism of Christianity. That's perfectly legal and is held up as some sort of a right that people have. It's taken for granted that this kind of thing is healthy and good. But in the Islamic context, suddenly it's all about not wanting to offend Muslims. And of course, there's fear behind the decision. They don't want to offend Muslims because they don't want to get killed. So it's a capitulation in the first place to violent intimidation, and in the second place to Sharia blasphemy norms. It's a very disastrous decision. We can only hope it will be reconsidered and overturned soon. But as it becomes hardened into precedent, it threatens all of us and heralds a time when you and I could get arrested for having this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know, I try to be more positive about it. Just because the ECHR made such a ruling doesn't mean that it has become an official law in Europe. But the thing is that if the ECHR made such a ruling, then that will, in the same way, inspire future cases to end the way this one ended, which is a horrible thing to happen. But I still don't want to think about it as the end of free speech or anything. I hope it's not. I'm just trying to be positive. I don't know.
I hope you're right.
I hope so. We talked before briefly about Quran only Muslims, but I didn't get into that with you. But now I have a question from Daniel D. Asking, what do you think about Quran only Muslims? Do you think it would be any different?
The Quran says many, many times, notably chapter 4, verse 80, but there are many other verses, to obey Muhammad. Don't just obey Allah, but obey Muhammad. Now, Muhammad is only mentioned by name 4 times in the Quran, and none of those mentions are very specific. So how are you going to obey Muhammad without knowing what he said and did? And you can only know what he said and did by going to the Hadith. So even if you're a Quran-only Muslim, it leads you and directs you out to the Hadith. This is why there have never been Quran-only Muslims in Islamic history. And as I said before, Quran-only Muslims are also whistling in the dark, because it isn't as if the Quran is benign and wonderful and the violent passages are in the Hadith. There's plenty of violence and hatred in the Quran itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would argue that the Hadith are by far worse if you take them collectively. But
there's more of them too. It's just that the Quran is a short book.
Yeah,
there's volume and volume and volume of it. It just keeps going on. So they've got more time to be more hateful, but they're working along the same lines, the same basic assumptions. For example, you take the Islamic anti-Semitism, and the Quran says the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims. It's chapter 5, verse 82, that Allah changed them into apes and pigs, 263 to 65, and 559, 60, and 7166, and that they say that Allah's hand is chained, 564, that his power is limited, that is, and various other things. They're under Allah's curse, 930, and so on. And the Hadith have all these stories about the Jews doing all those things, scheming against the Muslims, poisoning Muhammad, trying to destroy what the Muslims are doing. And so they just are essentially illustrating what the Quran says. But it's not as if the Quran says the Jews are bad in a way that the Hadith, rather. It's not as if the Hadith say the Jews are evil in a way that the Quran doesn't. They just amplify what the Quran says.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also say that if we look at Quran-only Muslims, there is a big contradiction in their teachings very often in today's time when they come out and talk to us about how the Quran is the only authority. In that the Quran doesn't really specify many things that they as Muslims are doing, like a lot like the prayer times and how to exactly pray and things like that. Those are specified in the Hadith, not very much in the Quran. The Quran talks about, I believe, 3 times of prayer. And it doesn't really. Sorry,
I don't recall exactly, but I think you're right. There's much more specifics about these things in the Hadith.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, I believe you are coming slowly towards an end here. What do you think about Islamic terrorism? Do you think no? Sorry,
I'm against it.
Yeah. I wanted to go actually in something different.
Oh, okay.
Many people, many people are a bit skeptical when I talk about this. I talk about this on Twitter sometimes because it really bothers me. But when we in the West talk about Islam or Iran and how things in Iran are going, then we are ignoring a very big problem. I think I have a very personal issue with this problem that I want to talk about, which is Saudi Arabia. While we are criticizing Islam, while we are criticizing global Islamic terrorism and trying to end it, trying to criticize Iran and trying to hope for a revolution in Iran, there is this. There are these ties still going on between wealthy Western countries, Western states, and Saudi Arabia. While Saudi Arabia is controlling the Middle East, is funding terrorism, is supporting terrorism actively, has many mosques in America, in Europe, everywhere that preach their fundamentalist ideologies. They establish schools with their ideologies. Don't you think we are kind of in some way wasting our time criticizing Islam and talking about Iran while our own governments are tied so much with Saudi Arabia?
Well, my conscience is clear in this regard. I've criticized Saudi Arabia for years and said that this was a sham alliance, that we should not consider the Saudis as our allies, that they don't consider us to be their allies, and that consequently the Saudis were not to be trusted. We're aiding with our oil money their spreading of their Wahhabi ideology, which is a virulent and violent form of Islam around the world, a more virulent and violent form than prevails in some other contexts, and we're paying for it. And so we're paying for the jihad, essentially. For years, I have denounced the Saudis, and I think that it's short-sighted for our government to consider them an ally. At the same time, however, at this point, I understand that there are some geopolitical realities that argue in favor of not breaking the alliance, at least in the short term. And they have to do with Iran and the fact that Barack Hussein Obama so much strengthened Iran that we should not, to abandon the Saudis now would be only to strengthen Iran further. And that would probably be unwise in this context, in this global context, that we're much better off at least playing ball with the Saudis for the short term. But we shouldn't have any illusions about who or what they are and what they're all about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think what was I going to say? I just had something. Yeah, it's. I mean, the problem with Saudi Arabia is not only about. I think it's not only something that happened recently. Not only something that has to do with Iran. I mean, that's obviously a factor, but I believe there are some different advantages of being allied with Saudi Arabia, in that America is a great power in the world, is the biggest power in the world, and kind of can use Saudi Arabia in that region as an ally to have some control of the region. So I think therefore I'm also a bit conflicted about this alliance, but it does so much more harm than it does good to anyone. Even in the Muslim world, so many people are outraged about how Saudi Arabia acts. I mean, even Muslims have a problem with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And in the West, we are allying with this state while trying to defeat Islamic terrorism, which is, I don't know, it bothers me every day. I'm talking about it every day, and I just wish we get rid of that.
It's self-defeating at very least.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, all right. That is all that we have, I believe. We had many questions. Thanks everyone for your comments, for your questions, for your participation. Thank you so much, Robert Spencer, for being with me here.
Thank you. A pleasure.
The only problem is that this live stream is a bug. It started without me starting it, and now I have no idea how to end it. It will probably go on until the 8th. There is no option for me to end this live stream. It will go on for the next 6 hours.
I'll have to send out for some dinner.
Well, no, I guess we can just end it, and then I'll
somebody hit the hang up.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Just one thing. You need to say something from me, which is stay away from Islam.
Stay away from Islam.
Thank you so much. That is my
apostate prophet.
That is my slogan at the end of every video. I can't just leave without that. All right, thank you so much everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Robert, for being with me here. Hope we can talk again in the future about anything, whatever we're going to talk about then. I hope we don't have any problems then. But yeah, thank you so much. If you want to announce where people can follow you, where people can find you.
Yeah, I'm at jihadwatch.org, Jihadwatch RS on Twitter. There's a Jihad Watch Facebook group, although it's so blocked and shadow banned, I doubt you'll be able to find it. But it's the same as jihadwatch.org anyway. And then my book, The History of Jihad, is at any self-respecting bookstore and at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. And
you have started a YouTube activity recently, I believe?
I'm sorry, what?
A YouTube activity?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel, Jihad Watch Video, and I put up videos there fairly often.
Okay, there you have it, guys. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you.
And everyone, have a great day. Yeah. Okay, Robert Spencer is gone. I'm here. I have no idea how to end this live chat. Believe me, it started with a bug. Typical YouTube, you see that? Anyway, I'll just leave here. You'll watch an empty screen, and then it will just end somewhere. Thanks so much, guys, for joining. And stay away from Islam.